Aloha kako. My name is Angela Coloretti McGough, and I'm here to present Interview 102, Interviewing Practice. I'm here at the Lama Library with our SOS Workshops Coordinator, Guy Naba, and we're recording this live. So when you're watching this on the video, feel free to stop whenever you want to in order to practice the interview questions that I'm going over. So our agenda is we're going to be going through a brief review of Interview 101. We're going to go over common interview questions, and then we're going to practice interviewing and responding. And so I will read an interview question, and then you can practice. And then finally, we have an evaluation. So just as a review, what is it that you bring to your interview? You're going to bring your documents in a Padfolio, notebook, or a tablet. And you're going to have at least one copy of your resume for each person that's interviewing you. So they can ask you questions about your skills, your work history, or your education. And you also do want to bring your cell phone, but make sure that it's off, not on silent, but off during your interview. Finally, you want to bring your positive attitude, and we'll talk a little bit more about how you can demonstrate that. So what is the first thing you do in the United States when you're introduced to someone? You shake their hand. So if you notice there's a character on the bottom right of your screen with his hand extended, that's a sign typically that someone is going to shake your hand. So you want to do the same when you introduce yourself to someone, put your hand out. You can see the thumb is up with all the fingers facing the person whose hand you're going to shake. And you want to put your thumb and the middle between your thumb and your pointer finger in contact with the middle of their thumb and their pointer finger. And you want to shake their hand 2 to 3 times, nothing more, and don't hold on for longer than that. And we want to avoid that awkward scenario. So find someone that you can practice this with and make sure that you have a firm and solid handshake, but not too hard. We're not The Rock, and you don't need to break someone's hand when you're shaking it. All right. What if you're online? Can't shake their hand online, but what you want to do is you want to reintroduce yourself. So they should be able to see your name on the screen, and they will probably introduce themselves as well. So you want to reintroduce yourself by stating your name clearly so they know how to pronounce it. You can practice making a comment after each person introduces themselves. So someone might say, "Hi, my name is Angela Coloretti McGough. I'm a counselor here at KCC." And then you would say, "Nice to meet you, Angela." Or another greeting, "Pleasure to meet you," or "Aloha," and make sure you say their name. So how else can you demonstrate that you're enthusiastic about the job, about that you feel confident, and that you have a positive attitude? So you want to use your other nonverbal behavior, even if you are online. So it would be things like making eye contact. So if you are online doing a Zoom or other platform interview, when you look at the camera, that means you're making eye contact. So you can look at the screen to look at the people, but every once in a while, look up at that camera so they can see you directly making eye contact with them. You want to maintain your tone. So you don't want to speak too softly. It's going to be really hard to hear, but you also don't want to speak too loudly. And you want to have some inflection in your voice. Make sure that your voice is upbeat. And so that kind of demonstrates too that you are enthusiastic. Regardless if you're in person or on camera, you want to sit up straight. So to show that you are ready to go and you're listening attentively. So you may also decide to lean forward, even if you're on a video interview. By leaning forward, it shows that you're demonstrating interest in what the person is saying. Now we're going to get into interview questions. So with the interview rubric, this is going to go over the things that people are using to look at maybe your non-verbal behavior, your appearance, and your knowledge of the position. So we have appearance, verbal and nonverbal communication, attitude, and poise. So these are the things I was just talking about, and we'll talk about in a little bit. And then finally, the quality of your answers. So out of the 4 areas on the rubric, The last one is about what you're actually saying. Let's go through the first few. To find a copy of this interview rubric, we have it online at go.hawaii.edu/capital V, capital Y, and the number 8. So that's go.hawaii.edu/capital V, capital Y, and the number 8. Here is the 4 areas. Here are the 4 areas for the interview rubric. And when you look at the rubric, you'll see meets all criteria, meets some of the criteria, and does not meet the criteria. So I'm only showing here the first column because we want to be in the meets all criteria. We don't want to be a maybe or a no. So for appearance, we're going to talk more about what this looks like. Verbal and nonverbal communication, I just discussed with you, as well as attitude and poise, and then quality of the answers. So for your appearance, you want to be well-groomed and neutral. You can look at the Interview 101 workshop where we talk about what you're wearing in more detail. Again, for nonverbal and verbal communication, we just discussed that. For attitude and poise, some of the ways you can also show that you are poised is to smile and to, make sure that you're greeting the interviewer, but also at the end of the interview, thanking them. And then we'll discuss what type of answers you can give. But for quality of the answers, what you want to do is have clear, relevant, and brief answers. So a lot of times the questions that you may be asked are very long, but your answer should be to the point. This is why I recommend you bring a pad folio or something to write on with you, so that you can write down the question if it comes in many parts to ensure that you're answering each part. And then also this is where you're going to show knowledge of the position you're applying for. When you're answering, the more certain that you are of your answers, which comes from your practice, it's going to appear that you are confident and that you're answering them honestly and sincerely. So there's 4 types of questions I'm going to cover. What I'm not going to cover is the kind of questions that usually people in creative jobs ask. So there can be things that you do in person. They might give you a computer laptop and ask you to type something out. They might have you role play, and they might have you maybe do some sort of creative activity to show your thinking process. These are not going to be addressed here, but if you are doing something like a group interview, or if you are interviewing for like a creative kind of an organization, we can meet and talk about what that might look like and practice those kinds of activities. But today I'm just going to cover the interview questions about you, about the organization and the job, your working style, and then also some of the more difficult questions. So one of the very first questions they will ask typically is like an icebreaker. And that question is, tell us a little bit about you. And this is so broad, but we don't want to take up too much time with the very first question. So this is something you want to practice. The first thing you're going to do is reintroduce yourself. Hi again, my name is Angela Coloretti McGough. You want to talk about your educational background. So I'm currently a student at Kapi'olani Community College, majoring in liberal arts with an emphasis in business, and I will be graduating in blank. The month and the year. And then your interest in working with a specific population or things. So you want to say something like, I'm interested in working here at Kapi'olani Community College because I enjoy interacting with college students. And a positive concluding statement. So something like, I look forward to talking with you more today and learning about the position. Right? So again, we're talking 3 to 4 sentences. You're going to reintroduce yourself, your name, say your educational background. You want to talk about your interest in working there. Typically, it's going to be a population or things, or it could even be, if you're, in IT, it could be something like a specific program. And then a positive concluding statement, right? So it's brief. The only way to do this is to practice. So you can pause your video write down a little paragraph, a 4-sentence paragraph, and then practice. So tell me a little bit about yourself. The second most common question is, why do you want to work here? So this actually, you don't want to be caught by surprise. So why do you want to work there? Sometimes it's your interest in the field. Sometimes it's the interest in the actual organization itself. You may have been a customer or a patient or a client or a student there. Or it could be you have a true alignment with their principles, their values, or their work environment. And the way for you to write this question out is to make sure that you've done your research on the organization. So interest in the field might be, I'm interested in working at KCC because I have been studying student affairs, and I'm really interested in helping college students to success. Interest in organization. I want to work at Kapiolani Community College because I see that it's a forward-thinking institution that has a high transfer rate of students in the sciences and from liberal arts. Or it could be that you've been a customer. So I want to work at KCC because I was an undergraduate here and I really want to promote the values that are here that I learned. Or it could be something related to the mission statement, such as on the website, I noticed that Kapiolani Community College is aligned with Native Hawaiian values, and a couple of those that resonate with me are Kuleana and Malama, and those are the 2 values that I work by and want to perpetuate in my position if I were to work here. So again, you want to practice, write it down, practice. So I'm going to ask you the question and you can write down your answer and then you can answer it to the screen. So why do you want to work here? All right. Other common questions are why this career, right? So why is it that you chose this specific area to work in? And what do you know about our organization? So for both of these, you got to think about it beforehand. So you want to demonstrate that you have really thought about where you're going and why. For the organization itself, you can look on their website. You can find out what they're known for in the news. You can look at maybe talk to other people who work there, and then you can share that. And again, you want to be brief and succinct. So what made you choose this as a career? What do you know about our organization? Okay, another area they can ask you about are specific skills. So there's a couple of ways that they might ask this. So for example, this job requires communication skills, or tell us about a time you used conflict resolution skills. So you'll know what the job requires because you applied for it. A good way to prepare for this is to write down an example for every skill that they ask. So this job requires using the Python software. Tell me more about how you use that in your job. If you know that it's required, you should have an example, right? So this job requires blank skills. Tell me about a time you use those skills. The next area are questions about your character. So a common question is to ask what other people would say about you. These could be your references, your friends, your former supervisors, your current or former professors, or even your family members. So the question is something like this. What would your best friend say about you? And what they're looking for is character. They want to know, what do you like? Are you someone that they would want to work with? Are you responsible? Are you on time? Are you trustworthy? Do you work hard? So really think about it. And if you don't have any, former supervisors, or you don't have any best friends, for example, think about what your family members would say. What would your parents say about you or your siblings? And pick the best qualities. So you want to show, again, your organizational skills, communication skills, anything that shows that have solid character. And another way that they might ask this question is, what is one area you are working to improve? So they're trying to get at your weaknesses, or they might ask, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Everybody should think about an area that they're working to improve. Nobody's perfect. However, when you're sharing with your future employer, you don't want to pick maybe the one thing that you're not that great at to highlight. You want to pick something that you found you were not using or doing very well and are improving. So one area I'm working on improving is my communication skills. I find that I'm really good writing and listening and reading, but sometimes I get shy when I'm speaking in public. So I've been practicing in, how do you say that I took a speech class at Kapiolani Community College and I got an A. I want to say I was one of the most improved students that semester. Okay, so you're talking about an area you're working to improve, but then the things you've done to improve it or are improving now. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? So this question, which actually is short term, I know 1 year seems like very short term, but in a career, 5 years is kind of like that's a good amount of time to be with a company. They want to see if you're going to stick with them, if they're going to train you and you'll be continuing on with the organization, or if you're going to leave. So you want to think about where you see yourself growing with that organization. Be prepared for this question. Even if this is a short-term thing, you plan on leaving in a couple of years, what you want to do is project your growth. So in 5 years, I see myself moving up to a managerial position. Hopefully with the right training, I will be able to help others to achieve in this organization in a managerial position. That's just an example. You want to say what you do and where you see yourself in the next 5 years. So where do you see yourself in 5 years? Another area is questions about how you work. They want to know if they put you in a situation that you'll be able to manage yourself professionally. So one of the areas they can ask is, how do you handle stress on the job? And so the best way to answer this question is to be authentic. You don't want to make something up. A lot of times they're asking, how do you care for yourself in a stressful situation? So you can talk about that, like what you do for self-care. Or you might want to talk about how you rely on your training, or you have discussions, you reflect on what you did. Maybe you can talk to your supervisor. There's a lot of ways that you can handle stress on the job. So think this through and be authentic to what you think you would do. Another common question, especially for customer service oriented or public facing positions, is how would you handle a patient who complains constantly? Or how would you handle a customer who's always complaining? Or how would you handle a customer who's complaining, period? So the idea, again, is if you're put in a situation where someone is challenging, maybe not pleasant, how do you manage that? And so you want to think about the ways that you interact with the public. But this is also an indicator that in this job, these things happen. It could be stressful. You could have complaints. So be prepared to answer the questions authentically. One example would be, I don't really like conflict. And in my role as a customer service representative, I want to give the best service that I can to the person who's complaining. So I want to make sure that I understand what their issue is and that I can provide a solution. And if I'm not able to resolve it for them, that I reach up to my supervisor to help get them the help that they need. If there's no one that can help me right away, I will ensure that I get their information and I write down exactly what their concern is so that someone who can follow up will. Okay, so that's just an example. What about those difficult questions? So an example could be, I noticed that you have a gap in your work history. What were you doing during that time? So on your resume, especially a chronological resume, it might show where you took time off. Maybe you took time off for school, or maybe you were working, but it was part-time and you didn't include it. It didn't include it. So you can answer that. I actually stopped working at this point in time because I went back to school, or I stopped working full-time, but I continued to work part-time in some service-oriented jobs, and I'm happy to share that employment history with you if you're after this interview. Okay, so again, be prepared. You have a copy of your resume in front of you. You know that you have a gap. You have already figured out how you're going to address it. Why were you at your jobs for only short periods of time? So the question is, again, looking at maybe you were somewhere for a year or less. So what you would do is you would think this through beforehand, and there's probably an answer similar to why you have a gap in your work history. Here's one. I noticed that you don't have any paid work experiences. How do you qualify for this job? So this is common for folks who maybe have gone straight to school, didn't have to work to go through school, or maybe were very involved in school doing volunteer work or doing internships or research. So again, you want to think about all of the things, and even if you don't have those experiences, there are ways that you've developed your skills. The question is, how do you qualify for this job? So that's what you're focusing on, not what you didn't do, but what you have done. So as an example, I've been a caregiver for my grandmother for the last 7 years. And so between work and that, I've been very busy. So I have excellent time management skills. I have managed all of her medications. I've taken her to all of her appointments. So I know how to manage a calendar. And I learned how to be a home health care aide without the certification while I was caring for my grandmother. So there's an example. Now, people may ask you questions that they're not supposed to ask you. And these are any questions that are not job related. So for example, inquiries about where you're from, what is your background, your ethnic background, cultural background, what is your gender, what is your sexual orientation, what is your religion? Those kinds of things should never be asked. But other things that shouldn't be asked, they shouldn't ask you anything about your health, whether it's a disability or any kind of health status, and they should not ask you about your family or your marital status. So, even if you're visibly looking pregnant, they cannot ask you about if you're having a child, as an example. So these are questions that are illegal, but you can still answer them. So there's 3 approaches that I've developed for you to respond. The first thing you can do is just answer. Sometimes you, in your mind, think, okay, I know that's an illegal question, but I'm going to answer it, and I'm making that choice. So yes, I do have a family. I'm a very active parent and step parent, but I'm able to manage my time well so that I would be able to dedicate my focus and my time towards this job when I'm not doing my family obligations, right? So that could be an answer. You can actually decline. You can not answer. So you can say, I'm not sure how that question is directly related to this position, period. End of sentence. So you're not answering, right? And that will just tell the person you're not answering. The third option is you can give them a chance to rephrase it. So maybe they asked a question like in an interview I was asked, so what high school did you go to? And in Hawaii, that's not an uncommon question socially, but professionally, it is a way for folks to get an idea of your status. In this case, I believe the person was trying to determine if I went to a specific school for Native Hawaiians, right? So there's a lot of things that folks can try to infer from the high school that you attended. So I could have said, can you rephrase that question so I understand how it relates to my qualifications for this position? And then the person could say, oh, okay, I was curious about what high school you went to because I wanted to know how familiar you are with the area that we serve. And I go, oh, okay, well, to answer that question, right? So you want to give them a chance to rephrase, and oftentimes they'll just withdraw the question. They'll just say, oh, no, never mind, right? So again, there's 3 approaches. The first is like you're going to just go along to get along. The second, you're just showing them, you're not supposed to ask me that. And then the third is, you're not supposed to ask me that, but ask me something else and I'll answer. finally, at the end of the interview, oftentimes interviewers will ask, do you have any questions for me? Now, we want to prepare for this, but we also know that sometimes interviewers do not ask this question, okay? So the first is for you consider, like, maybe it's an organization that you're curious about its values. So is there anything you want to know about further? So I see on your website that there's a huge emphasis on your ki'inunui, which is a responsibility to Native Hawaiians and Hawaii. Can you talk a little bit more about how this position can help to fulfill that ki'inunui? What about the specific job? So is there something in the job description that made you curious? Now, again, you're not going to be asking them, how do I do such and such, or what does this job look like? Because you should have read the job description. But maybe there's something in there that you're curious about. So I noticed in the job description, it mentions that I would be backup to the receptionist. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? Okay, so that's an example. And you're not at the point where you've been offered the job. So avoid asking any questions about how much you're going to get paid, what your schedule is going to be, when you get time off, because again, these can give the impression that that's the only reason why you're applying for this job. That may be true. You might not take this job if the schedule doesn't work out, or if they're not going to offer you enough. But in the interview, this is not the place for you to ask about that. That would be after you're offered the position. And you can say, no, you've answered everything. So sometimes they'll give you information during your interview. Like when I interview my student employees, I start by giving them a full description of the job, because I want to make sure they know what they're getting into. And then if I ask, do you have any questions for me? It wouldn't be surprising if they say, no, you've answered everything. And then you can also add, if I do have further questions, who can I contact, right? So you keep that door open. And finally, you want to make a lasting impression. So as I mentioned, whether you're in person or on a video, you want to hear everyone's name, write it down. In person, you could ask for a business card. So if folks, and sometimes they'll just offer it to you, so you'll get an idea of who they are and what they do. You want to thank them after the interview. So just say, thank you so much for this time. I've enjoyed my time with you, or thank you again, each of you, for interviewing me. And you can shake their hands again, but you don't have to. Here's an important point, and something that is lacking, I think, is the personal thank you note. So folks, you can handwrite a note. Even if your writing's not the best, a handwritten note is just a nice touch. You want to handwrite it, handwrite the address on the envelope, you put a stamp on it, and you actually put it in a mailbox. If there's a quick turnaround, so let's say like it's going to take more than less than 2 days for them to make their decision, make sure you also send an email. So you can reply to the person who set the interview with you, but also make sure to mention the names of the people that interviewed you if you don't have their contact information. So that could look like, dear Angela, thank you so much for setting up an interview with Guy, Gigi, and Joy. I really enjoyed my time with them. Can you please share my thanks for the time that they spent interviewing me? Right? So you might not have their direct email, but you're able to give them a quick email thank you through the person that set up the interview with you. It's important when you're sending an email or a letter to folks that you mention something specific so it's customized. So you don't want to send the same exact text to every single person. Make sure that you say something different to each. So it could be something like, I enjoyed talking with you specifically about sports, or whatever it is. There's typically something that the person asked you that you can reiterate, even if it was an actual question they asked. So I enjoyed sharing more about my work history with you, right? So just have one sentence that's specific or customized to each person. So if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I do have contact information to share with you. If you were in person, you can fill out an evaluation. I do use Star Balance, and there's the link. You can also email me, and I set up my appointments in Iliahi, room 228. I'm happy to meet with you and help you with your career upgrade. Thank you so much for your time.